Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Erik Lautier, who is a consultant serving most of the U.S., but based in France, focused on e-commerce. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. Thank you so much for having me.
So Erik, why don't you first just give us a quick snapshot on your background and how you came to be, a consultant focusing on e-commerce?
Yeah, so I've been in this space for over 20 years at this point. And, I would say I certainly didn't have a very typical background, although I would say that, people who got into e-commerce 20-something years ago didn't really study e-commerce. There wasn't that opportunity back in college. But I was a drama major in college. And so I was studying to be an actor, ended up getting a master's in music with a focus in vocal performance and opera. So I was a performer. And I actually made a living as a performer for several years and was supporting myself in New York. And one day I thought, well, you know what? I need to market myself. I need to advertise my career somehow. And so I'm going to build myself a website. I'm going to teach myself web design. And, after a few weeks, I had produced a website that had my agent and here's when I'm going to be on TV next and all of these things. And lo and behold, a bunch of actors and singers saw it and started to offer to pay me to build sites for them. So a little light bulb went off, and I started a web development company serving the arts and industries. And, it just kind of gained steam from there. I had a client who was a soap opera star who was starting a cosmetics company, and that became my first e-commerce site. So that was in the year 2000. And of course, back then, right, there's no Shopify, there's no Wix, none of these things exist. And if you want a website, you had to go to somebody like me who had to basically build it from scratch. So, that's kind of how it started to evolve. And, as I got going, I realized I had absolutely no idea what I was doing on the business side of things. And, my training, of course, was acting and singing. So I ended up going back to school. I got my MBA. And when I got out, I got my first sort of official real e-commerce job that was working for a company called Eden, which was a fashion brand that was started by Bono from U2 and his wife. And I was hired initially on a consulting contract. It was an 8-week gig to literally code front end and back end of their e-commerce sites from scratch. And 3.5 years later, I was still there. And at that point, LVMH had taken an interest in the business, and things were overall, some momentum. I ended up getting an offer to join Lacoste. So I joined Lacoste. The CEO from Lacoste ended up taking me to BB as the chief digital officer. After a couple of years at BB, I left and joined Francesca's as the SVP of direct-to-consumer and marketing, and left there after 4 years as the EVP e-commerce and CMO. And, at that point, I was really coming on to about 20 years in the industry. And what I knew that I loved was the constant change and evolution in e-commerce and in digital marketing. And there was always something new to discover. And that's what I was most passionate about. And, had I had enough, I think, confidence in myself earlier on, I probably just would have stayed a consultant all that time, as opposed to joining clients and going into industry. But, I ended up coming back to consulting world because for me, the idea of joining a project, starting something new, finding a new problem to tackle because it's always different, and learning something new every single time is fascinating. That's what I get out of bed for. And so I started my own consulting company, so Erik & Co., ERIK and Company, back about 2 years ago, and have been pretty much busy nonstop ever since with different clients in direct-to-consumer and the retail space. So it's been a lot of fun. So sorry, that was a fairly long-winded answer, but there was a bit of a story to unwind.
No, I love that story. And the kind of entrepreneurial aspect, and for parents that have kids that become theater majors, it's not necessarily maybe the highest career prospects for every single one. They might have a little bit of trepidation, so they can always go into web design
Yeah,
and be
there is hope. There is hope for theater majors out there.
But tell us, I got to ask before we go on to e-commerce. Just tell us a little bit about your performance career. What sort of things were you performing in New York in the 90s?
Yeah, so back in the day, they had something called soap operas, and we joke about them, but it was a pretty stable source of work for a lot of actors in New York and Los Angeles. I had a small role on a soap called One Life to Live for about 5 years. Played a cop, and speaking lines and that type of stuff. But that kept me busy for a while. I was in the Broadway touring production of Beauty and the Beast. And I mean, it was crazy. I would be on stage, I'd be doing a show, and I would have 10 minutes off between scenes, and I'd be back in the dressing room doing work for clients, designing, coding, doing all that type of stuff. And at one point, I realized this whole performance thing is getting in the way of my job, and so I slowly transitioned out of the acting stuff into to what I do now.
Wow, what a story! And as a smaller character on a soap opera, a person could support themselves on that. Like, I mean, how many hours?
Not quite, but
not quite.
So I did about 75 episodes over the course of 5 years, and not quite enough to support oneself. But the musical theater jobs, the operas, the other things that I was doing was enough. It was enough to get by in New York, at least back in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, fast forward to today. Let's talk a little bit about e-commerce. So we got your background, sort of the standard entry approach to e-commerce, starting out in musical theater, as most e-commerce professionals do. Give us an overview of your practice today.
So, what typically happens is I'm typically brought in to do an assessment for a business, and that's to look at what the opportunities are, both in terms of revenue generation, but also potential cost savings. And, I typically spend, let's say, 20 to 40 hours digging into something, and, I generally get the keys to Google Analytics so I can jump in and really understand what's happening with the business, and look at what they're doing in marketing, look at the overall site structure, look at the merchandising, look at different aspects of the business, and provide really a high-level overview of where I see the greatest opportunities, triaged in order of, this is what I think has the most impact if you address it now, given the resources that you have at your disposal, both in terms of tech as well as human resources. And basically sequence out what needs to be done from now until whenever. And I've done that for a number of different clients, some of whom I ended up joining full time, but I've never done one of those assessments that did not lead to an extension of an engagement or a full-time offer. And, typically, and listen, I have been the client before where I've brought in consultants to a business. And, sometimes there's simply too much work to be done for the internal team to be able to address some of these things, or to even notice them. And it's very helpful to have an outside set of eyes come in and look at the business and say, look, this is what I think you need to focus on in order to drive top line, in order to improve bottom line, so on and so forth. So that's where things usually start in terms of projects with me. Where it often evolves to, at least the last few major projects I took on, is sort of an interim CMO or CDO position where I help recruit a team, where I put meeting cadences in order and get the right structure, right reporting structure in terms of the business, and just get everything in order as we bring people into the business. And as we bring people in, I gradually step out of the business and then move on to another project.
Talk to me a bit more about the assessment. I'd love to go into a bit more detail about what are the different pieces of that? Are there 5 different sections of the assessment? Tell us kind of what are some of the things you look at, and just kind of have a second or third degree double click on that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll oversimplify, but there are really 3 things that matter in e-commerce, and it's your traffic, your conversion rate, and your average order value. And the product of those things, of course, is your revenue. And what you need to do to drive each one of those things can vary wildly. And I've walked into businesses where it was apparent that the greatest opportunity, that the most low-hanging fruit was really in traffic. And I've been into businesses where the greatest opportunity was conversion improvement. And when you're a consultant, and certainly the way I like to approach things is I want to be able to move very, very quickly. I want to be able to find low-hanging fruit very quickly for my client, and I want to be able to demonstrate immediate value so that they know that their investment is being very, very well spent. And of course, the things that you're going to do to improve traffic are potentially very different than what you would do to improve conversion rate or to improve average order value. And so it usually starts there, is breaking things down into these 3 components, understanding the levers that are going to move each of those, understand where the business lies in terms of its relative level of sophistication in each of those, and understanding which one of those we have the greatest opportunity to move in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of expense from the client. So that's usually where I start, and from there's usually a ton more work that has to be done.
Sure. So can you take us sort of 1 or 2 levels deeper beyond that? So, I mean, you could sort of in 5 minutes ask the client, hey, what's your current traffic, conversion rate, and average order value? And you'd say, well, that sounds a little bit low for the industry benchmarks. You should be at X, whatever. But what's sort of what do you start looking at, say, for conversion rate? What are the 3 to 5 to 10 things or whatever that you're looking at to get a sense of how are they versus best in class? What are the opportunities here? Share some examples for each one of those 3 categories.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I would say is that benchmarks are tricky, right? Because it is all relative. And to say that the industry benchmark for conversion rate is, let's call it 2.5%, if that is the case, if you are a very, very high-end, expensive jewelry brand, for example, you may have a lower conversion rate than that, but that's because your average order value is going to be so much higher than what the industry standard would be. And that's another thing to point out, is that a lot of times these things don't move in the same direction. And you can do things that are going to drive traffic significantly, but when you do that, you are probably also risking lowering your conversion as well as your average order value, because if you're driving traffic significantly, you may be going out to a brand new potential customer who's not as familiar, who is simply less likely to convert, and if they do, they're going to spend less when they do convert. And so these things tend to be at odds with each other, not always, but often. And so you have to balance them so that the thing that you are driving is not at the expense of the other things. And of course, not to the extent that you're actually doing damage to the business. But, if we look at each of those things, in traffic, certainly there are opportunities to drive traffic. You can buy traffic all day long. It doesn't mean that you should. And one of the things that I often see in a lot of businesses that I go into is that there are simply channels that are not being exploited to the extent that they should or could be. And I also run across perhaps some overspending that is happening in channels where they could find greater efficiency. And to illustrate, for example, there was a client I worked with where they were over-commissioning affiliates in the affiliate program by a pretty significant margin. And the program simply hadn't been managed attentively as it could have been. And again, this is just a function of resources, and they were small and growing. But we were able to find really six-figure savings on a calendar year basis by changing the commission structure, while at the same time actually increasing the percentage of traffic that the affiliate business accounted for. And, it was an immediate, very quick win for the business that easily justified the fee that my consulting firm is being paid, while generating tangible results almost immediately for the client. So that's an example on the traffic side. On the conversion side, there's often, of course, things you can do. I mean, listen, if you ask me to improve conversion tomorrow, it's easy. We just stop marketing. And we just wait for people to show up to the site who come there directly, because direct traffic is often going to convert a lot better than traffic that you're paying to get. But what you can do, of course, is you can segment better. You can target better. You can do some things with your email program, and just about everybody out there is going to have an email program if they're an e-commerce company of significance. But oftentimes it's maybe a little bash and blast in terms of the email send strategy. They're going to far too large of a list. They are losing subscribers. They are potentially doing damage to sender reputation, because low open rates, low click-throughs, all of that can damage your sender reputation, which can put you in spam folders. And of course, that's very, very dangerous, something you have to stay away from. But simply doing a better job of segmentation, targeting, personalization of the content on its own, because email is such a massive channel, can have pretty important repercussions for improving overall conversion rate. And then in terms of average order value, a lot of that can happen just on the site itself, and it's using product recommendations. It is sometimes a promotional lever, like a bundle promotion, a buy one, get one. These types of things can often drive average order value up. Of course, as soon as you start promoting, you have to be worried a little bit about margin. So that's one consideration you always have to keep in the back of your mind. And of course, it varies from client to client. Some clients will promote and are very happy to promote. Others try to avoid it like the plague. And there are very good arguments for both of those.
What are some things that you notice when you are just on an e-commerce site as a consumer that you're thinking, aha, that you're noticing that I wouldn't, because I'm sort of just a layperson? But what are some things that you're noticing that the average, shopper might not, in terms of little tricks, or maybe, oh, the button here is not well placed, or boy, they have an extra step in here that they shouldn't have, because that every time you have an extra screen to get to, that's going to reduce your conversion rate, or people are going to drop off? Or what are some things that you notice when you're on e-commerce sites?
Yeah, listen, that's a great question. I would say, in a general sense, that one of the most important things that you can do on your site is to make it convenient for people. And that is eliminating interstitial pages that serve no purpose, for example. It is putting the buttons where it's going to be easy for people to find and to reach. It's not getting so clever with design that you impact usability. I see things on sites all the time that just drive me crazy, because they are making it more challenging to check out, when really the thing that you have to do, and what I think Amazon has done so well, is they've made it easy. The easier you can make it, the quicker somebody can check out, the better it is for the business. And so I think anything that streamlines the whole experience and makes it simple for somebody to get from the PDP, that's product detail page, to the cart and into checkout, that's what you have to prioritize, because there's something called funnel visualization, which Google Analytics and other analytics packages can visualize for you, where you see where people drop off along the way. And, you always see drop off between the cart and the first page of checkout to the second page of checkout to the final screen. And understanding where those choke points are and where you're losing people is one of the more important pieces of analysis that you can do around the entire e-commerce experience.
Yeah,
and of course, there's stuff that
a question on that is, I've just noticed it seems like only the past couple months, but maybe I've been missing it. It seems that just a couple months ago, I started seeing a button on a lot of sites where it offers, you're getting, like, you have a cart and you're at that stage, and then it says, like, one path would allow you to do the normal register as a customer and put in all your information and your address and everything. But then they have this Apple Pay button, and boy, you click on that thing and it just puts in your shipping info and your credit card and everything, and you just have to double click and boom, you paid, right? And it makes it so much easier. Is that a new thing is that relatively recent that Apple started having this Apple Pay integration where you could just click and pay and they would give them your, shipping address and everything?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it all of a sudden just happened, but I would say it's becoming more and more widespread. And different e-commerce vendors, companies like Shopify, for example, are making it a lot easy to integrate additional payment methods. The other thing that you're seeing probably a lot of is the opportunity to split payments, right? So whether through Affirm or QuadPay, Klarna, there are a lot. Afterpay is another big one. There are a lot of these that make it just easier for somebody to be able to pay in installments as opposed to paying all at once. But with regards to, whether it's Apple Pay, whether it's Google Pay, whether it's PayPal, there are all these different methods. I think a couple of years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to laugh when we think about the times in the past when you had to actually enter your information to check out. Because when you think about it, is it really necessary? I can log into my phone with my fingerprint, right? My wife looks at her phone and it recognizes her, and all of a sudden it knows everything, right? Why is anything beyond that actually necessary to check out from a website? And we're quickly getting to the point where you're not going to have to put that information in because you'll have already been authenticated through the device. And so it's just going to get easier and easier. And I think the brands that unlock that first are going to be the ones, among the winners.
What about sort of AI, and what sorts of things are you seeing there, either in terms of engines that can tell what other sites you've been on so they can come up with recommendations and customize your experience and what you see when you get to the website?
Yeah, listen, I think a lot of people love talking about AI and certainly want to say that they're doing AI. I would say that AI is still largely the domain of third-party vendors that work with brands and e-commerce platforms rather than something that brands do themselves. I think some of the best examples of the behavior that you're describing is you go search for anything right now and then go to Facebook and then you're seeing ads for that thing. We went skiing recently and I was looking for some ski gear, and the next thing I know, all I see on Facebook in my newsfeed is ads for ski gear. And that's just the way it works these days. And literally, if I'm looking for something, I now search for it knowing and actually looking for those ads because I know I'm going to be served. And, it's an efficient way to do things, right? And it tends to be pretty good. Facebook's numbers, I think, speak for themselves there.
Right. So that's often being externally served, all those AI recommendation type things.
Yeah, and there's also within the site experience itself, right, there are product recommendations.
Right.
And they can be a function of this is what people who browse the items that you browse also browse these, right? And that's fairly straightforward. Everybody has that. Doing something a little bit more in depth, of course, requires more horsepower, and there are companies out there that are providing that kind of service. But just generally having any product recommendations whatsoever is better than not having any at all. So even sort of bad AI is better than no AI.
Talk to me some about the fulfillment side. So in terms of what's that ecosystem, how is it evolving, sort of third-party logistics to ship it for a brand and so forth?
Yeah, I would say that Amazon has raised the bar for everybody and made it basically raised expectations from the consumer side. Because when you order something online now, your expectation really is that it needs to leave within minutes, and you need to get it the next day. And a lot of merchants are not really equipped to do that. And I think if you're one of those merchants that needs to take a little bit more time, maybe because there's a certain level of preparation that has to be done around the product itself and quality assurance and some things that have to happen before something goes out the door, or if it is food, or there are a lot of different categories where it's difficult to just throw it in a box and send it immediately. I just think you have to be forthright about that on the site and manage expectations so that you're not creating an unreasonable expectation from the consumer that they're going to get something a lot quicker than it's actually going to take. Because that's, Amazon sort of spoiled it for the rest of us, and now we have to keep up. But all that said, I think that communication is probably the most important part of it. And I've always found value in, on the product detail page itself, describing how long it's going to take for this product to ship. And you see that on Amazon, right? Say, this will ship tomorrow if you order in the next, 7 hours, right? And having that sort of communication at least level sets expectations for the consumer so they have a rough range of when something should arrive. And I think that's the most important part of it.
Walk me through a typical e-commerce organization. So maybe it's for I don't know how big of a company this would be, but let's say you had an e-commerce team that had maybe 20 people on it. What would the different roles be on that team?
That is a great question, and you actually see a lot of variability in this. And the reason for that is because at some organizations, you may have people who work on e-commerce in marketing specifically, but who report into marketing, which is its own organization. You may have people who work on the merchandising side of e-commerce, but report into merchandising, which in itself is its own organization. And at the same time, you can also have organizations where those functions live entirely underneath e-commerce itself. And obviously, this is going to depend partly on the type of organization we're talking about. Are we talking about an omni-channel retailer, or are we talking about a direct-to-consumer brand where everything is e-commerce already? But typically what you have, and let's say at a mid-sized retailer, the type of retailer that would have about 20 people total in an e-commerce division, you're going to have a head of e-commerce. With 20 people, we're probably talking about a VP role at the least. It could be SVP, or it could even be a chief digital officer, just depending on what the overall revenue is for the company. And underneath those people, at least the way I like to structure things, and I'll oversimplify once again, is that there are three aspects of e-commerce that really matter. There is the merchandising, there is the marketing, and there's the site experience, right? And those things have to work really, really well together. Whatever the merchandising is, whatever products are coming out, marketing has to understand that very, very well and has to speak to that. The site experience has to support that. right? So you have to have really three heads who are responsible each for one of those areas and who work very closely together under the direction of somebody who is responsible overall for the e-commerce business to ensure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, or the center hand in this case, because there are three people.
Great. So let's double click and walk me through each one of those groups, merchandising, marketing, and site experience, and what would those organizations look like, and what's the typical titles that you might see?
Yeah, so in merchandising, there's a very important component, which is the site merchandising itself, which is understanding basically where things need to be on the site. And I've seen the placement of items on a site fundamentally impact the overall performance of the business. And I'll give you an example. A long time ago, when I was working for Lacoste, the standard polo that everybody thinks of when they think of Lacoste is the L1212 polo. And we always had that in the top left of our site because that's, number one, that's the number one spot. That's where everybody looks. And that's it was by far the biggest seller on the site. And Macy's was also selling Lacoste at the time. And I looked at their numbers, and the slim fit polo was the number one seller. And I thought that was very strange because we're used to seeing the L1212 being the number one seller. And I went to Macy's.com, and lo and behold, they had put the slim fit in the top left, right? So they had given it the number one spot. And as a result, people who were on Macy's.com looking for a Lacoste polo saw that, assumed that that was the polo that they were supposed to get, sort of the iconic Lacoste polo, and they bought that one instead, right? So something that basic can fundamentally impact overall performance. So the site merchant's job is really to understand all of that, and through analyzing clicks and views on products and add to cart rates and all of these different factors, there's a zillion different inputs that a good site merchandiser is going to take into account. Look at all of that, and at the end of the day, decide where things need to be in order to maximize the overall yield of the site. So that's a very, very important role there.
And I guess, and I say there's probably elements too of sort of taxonomy, because on some sites, like maybe it's an apparel brand for skiing or something, and you might have men and women and children as different things, but then also within men, you'd have, coats and outerwear, you'd have like base layer, and just sort of figuring out what all those different categories are, and what the order they should be in, alphabetical or ranked high to low or something. I mean, there's probably a lot of science and art around that as well.
Oh, hugely important. Yeah, absolutely. And taxonomy is one of those things, especially in apparel, that is reviewed with regularity, because you are going to have things that seasonally make sense, right? When do you put sweaters? When do you put sweaters in the nav at all? And when do you put it into the main nav as opposed to one of the sub navs, right? And when do leggings go in there? When do swimsuits appear, right? So all of this taxonomy work is hugely important, and is going to be a function of not just what time of year it is, but also, you get data all the time from people who are on the site. And so, for example, if you look at search on the site, and I'm not talking about Google, I'm talking about people on your site searching for things, they're telling you what they're looking for. And if there's something that's getting a lot of search volume because they cannot find it otherwise, it's time to maybe consider putting it in the navigation.
That's so interesting. Yeah, if people are searching for it a lot, then that's maybe not good, because they should be able to find it easier. Show them a picture of it.
Exactly. And if you don't have it at all, that's where another role comes in here, and that's the role of the buyer, right? And again, at some organizations, the buyer lives purely under merchandising, and they're buying perhaps for offline and online. At some companies, you have somebody who's buying specifically for online, which makes sense, because oftentimes the online shopper is going to behave a little bit more, a little differently from the from the offline shopper. And so you want to make sure that the assortment that you have online is representative of what that particular customer is looking for. But that buyer is going to look at, for example, search volume for products that we don't even carry, that maybe we should consider bringing into the assortment because our customer actually wants them, right? So another important role in the merchandising function. Jumping over to the marketing function, we could drill down, way down into each of these areas, but just to provide maybe a couple primary roles under each one. In the marketing function, generally you're going to have somebody who is responsible for acquisition, right? And that's going out and finding new people. Typically, they will manage paid social. They will manage paid search, right? So that's Google Ads. It's Bing. Anybody who might be searching for the brand or searching for terms that are relevant to the brand. Again, if you work for Burton Snowboard, somebody could be searching for Burton, or they could just be searching for snowboard, right? And you introduce them to Burton as a result. And somebody in charge of acquisition is, it's a fantastic role. There are a lot of brilliant acquisition people out there. It is hard to find a really good one, though, because they are so in demand, and particularly with the dominance that paid social and paid search have, the lion's share of traffic that they can account for a lot of brands, particularly brands that are new and trying to get known. It's a very important role to fill. You've got somebody on the acquisition side often who is managing things like email, SMS, perhaps a loyalty program, CRM functions, assuming you've got a large enough database to justify some or all of those things. And they're responsible simply for maintaining that customer relationship, for segmenting the lists, for understanding how to reach people, how to bring them back if they start churning. When people are at risk and they haven't visited the site for a while, how do you bring them back? How do you win people over who maybe joined the email list but never bought in the first place? How do you win people back who bought and then stopped buying for some reason, right? That's the job of the retention manager. And then you've got things that are more on the brand and social side. We talked about paid ads in social. I classify that differently than somebody whose job is to interact in social with the community, right? And that's posting stuff organically, whether on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. TikTok has become massive, and I've seen companies absolutely hit the jackpot with TikTok when it works for companies. It can be huge and an incredible revenue and brand awareness driver for them. But that's the other sort of the third leg of the stool that I would say under marketing that is really, really important. Under site experience, you generally got somebody who's responsible for more of the nuts and bolts, the operations, making sure that the site is up all the time, pretty much, that it is running quickly. So, that person might be responsible for the CDN, for load time, for all of these things, just to ensure that those things are not problematic. You're going to have somebody who's possibly on the e-commerce logistics side of things, so ensuring that all of the packages are getting out the door on time, and somebody that may be over the customer service aspect. So what sort of feedback are we getting from customers? And that's chat. That is, there's chat through social as well. It's phone calls. It could be email customer service, all of that. So really those are the three kind of big chunks.
That's fantastic. I'm really interested to hear a bit more about TikTok. So is that companies creating their own content for TikTok or paying influencers to mention them, or how are companies spending money on TikTok, or is it ads on TikTok, or?
Yeah, so it's a little of all, right? And it depends on who we're talking about. But I had a client whose product ended up being reviewed by an influencer that had a very significant following, and she's hilarious, and it just caught on, and it became, it went crazy viral, but it only happened because the company created the content in the first place organically, right? Because they created organic content that in itself was popular, it got the attention of an influencer who then did their own version of it, which absolutely blew up. And then what happened after that is other influencers who saw that decided they were going to capitalize on it and say, okay, well, I saw so-and-so do this, so I wanted to provide my take on it, right? And so there was this massive sort of first surge, but then you also had these second-order effects and even third-order effects that happened as a function of that. And that was 100% organic. Now, you can advertise on TikTok, and sometimes ads work, sometimes they do not. But overall, as a platform, it's gotten absolutely massive, and I believe it dominated web traffic in 2021. I forget where I saw that stat or if it's entirely accurate, but it would not surprise me if that were the case.
Wow, that's amazing that it sort of just, seems like it almost came out of nowhere just a couple of years ago and became so big. For brands that want to use TikTok in that way, are they, it's not, someone of my generation that's an expert at it. Are brands like going out and hiring 16 or 17-year-olds who, are familiar with that medium, or how are they approaching that? How do you find a TikTok expert?
That's the amazing thing, right? Is that you've got generally maximum 1 to 2 years of experience on TikTok, if you've got any. And a lot of it is just personality and understanding the types of things that work on there. And you've got to be a user for that, right? Like, I don't get it. I try to pay attention on TikTok, and I find it a little confusing sometimes. And this is where I just defer to people who understand it all so much better and let them do what they do, because that's where the magic happens. And it's it's an art. And generally, yes, people who use TikTok tend to be a little bit younger, but you're seeing that age rise, right? Just like you saw it with Facebook, just like you're seeing it with Instagram, right? Nobody has a hold on youth forever. And all you have to do, I think, for TikTok is find somebody on your team, it doesn't matter where they are, who understands the medium and who is passionate for it and wants to engage with it. And that's the person you put in charge. If they can communicate with customers, and if they understand how the platform works, but more importantly, the type of content that works on TikTok, that's the person you have to empower.
Amazing. Erik, this has been a great discussion. If listeners wanted to find you, follow up, contact you, where would you point them online? If you want to share a website or a TikTok address or Twitter or LinkedIn, where should people follow up?
Yeah, so years ago, I picked up the domain erik.co. That's ERIK.co, thinking I'm going to use it someday. I just don't know for what. And, one day I founded my own consulting company, Erik & Co. So that's my company's domain, erik.co. That's ERIK.co. And there's a contact form there. You can reach me through there.
Fantastic. Erik, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate your time.